It began with a sound no one could explain. In the winter of 2022, renovation crews were tearing through the basement of a crumbling church in rural Pennsylvania. Dust fell in heavy clouds as sledgehammers struck the stone walls. Then, a worker's tool clanged against something hollow, something buried deep within the foundation. When the wall gave way, the crew expected nothing more than old pipes or forgotten storage. Instead, they uncovered a locked wooden trunk sealed with rusted chains. Inside was a collection of items no one had seen in nearly half a century. A torn leather jacket, a stack of photographs, a blood-stained notebook, and a police badge that had been missing since 1975. That single discovery pulled an entire town back into one of the darkest unsolved cases in its history: the disappearance of 3 teenagers and the police officer assigned to protect them. A case many thought was long buried until now. The church itself had been standing for more than a century, its stone walls weathered by storms, its pews scarred by generations of restless hands. Locals said the basement had always felt strange, colder than the rest of the building. Even in the heat of July, children dared each other to run down the narrow staircase, but no one lingered long. Something about that place made even the bravest uneasy. Back in 1975, the town of Mill Creek was shaken by a disappearance that left families fractured and trust shattered. 3 teenagers, Emily Rhodes, Michael Carter, and Daniel Holt, walked home after choir practice one autumn evening. They never made it. Their parents searched the streets, police combed the woods, and search dogs followed trails that ended abruptly at the edge of town. Assigned to the case was Officer William Hayes, a young patrolman known for his diligence and quiet kindness. He promised the families answers. But weeks later, Hayes himself vanished without a trace. His cruiser was found abandoned by the river, door wide open, radio still crackling. The town buried its grief under layers of silence. Rumors spread, kidnappings, cults, even whispers of something darker lurking beneath the church. But with no evidence, the case went cold. And now, nearly 5 decades later, the discovery in that basement threatened to tear open old wounds. Because the items inside the trunk didn't just belong to the missing teenagers. One bore the unmistakable initials carved by Officer Hayes himself. The trunk was carried out of the church basement under strict police supervision, its chains rattling like bones in the silence of the old sanctuary. Word spread quickly through Mill Creek. By nightfall, a small crowd had gathered outside the church, their faces pale in the glow of flashing patrol car lights. Inside the evidence room, Detectives' pride opened the lid more carefully this time. The air that escaped was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic. At the top lay the leather jacket, cracked with age, but still recognizable to those who had known Michael Carter. His initials, MC, were stitched in fading thread inside the collar. Beneath it, a floral hair ribbon knotted into a bow that Emily's mother swore she had tied into her daughter's hair the night she disappeared. But it was the notebook that drew the most attention. Its cover was torn, its pages warped with dark stains that had long since turned brown. The first page carried just a single line, scrawled in messy handwriting. "They told me not to come here after dark." The writing didn't match any of the missing teenagers. Forensics would later confirm what some in the room already suspected. It belonged to Officer William Hayes. Detective Laura Jensen, who now headed the reopened case, turned the badge over in her gloved hand. The number was clear and the nameplate W. Hayes was intact, though rust had eaten into the metal. It should have been impossible. Officer Hayes had been declared dead decades ago. His body never recovered. Yet here, in a locked trunk beneath the church, lay proof that he had once been there long after official records said he vanished. And then came the photographs. Dozens of them curled at the edges, showing ordinary scenes of the church basement. Wooden beams, stacked chairs, storage crates. But in nearly every photograph, if you looked closely, there was a blur, a shadow where no shadow should be. In one, Emily's face was visible in the corner, eyes wide, as though she had turned just as the camera clicked. The discovery shook the investigation to its core. If the children had been here, why had no one found them during the original search? Who had locked away their belongings? And most disturbingly, had Officer Hayes been complicit, or had he become a victim himself? By the time the evidence was sealed and logged, Mill Creek was alive with whispers. The basement was sealed off again, guarded through the night. Yet some of the construction workers swore they heard movement below the church after everyone had left. A dragging sound, a door creaking open, and when the detectives returned the next morning, the trunk sat exactly where they had left it, but the notebook had been moved to the floor, its pages splayed open, as though someone had been reading in the dark. Detective Laura Jensen hadn't slept. She sat in her office with the notebook open under a desk lamp, every page studied as if the ink itself could give up its secrets. Most of the entries were scattered, unfinished sentences, written in haste. They're watching from the walls. The sound stops when the lights come on. I promised them safety, but I can't get them out. The handwriting grew more frantic with each page, until the words trailed off entirely, swallowed by stains. Jensen closed the cover and leaned back, her pulse racing. News outlets from neighboring towns had already descended on Mill Creek. For decades, the disappearance of 3 teenagers and a young officer had been a local tragedy. Now, with tangible evidence, it had become a story that refused to be contained. Reporters crowded outside the police station, shoving microphones at anyone who might have known the missing. For the families, old wounds bled fresh. Emily's mother, now gray-haired and frail, stood on her porch clutching the ribbon shown on the evening news. Tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, "I tied that myself." She was supposed to come home after choir. She promised. Michael Carter's younger brother, who had been only 10 when the disappearances happened, told reporters about the strange phone calls their house received in the weeks after, silent on the other end, except for the faint sound of a church bell. At the time, police dismissed it as cruel pranksters. Now, those memories felt like warnings no one had understood. Detectives followed up on every lead, every rumor. Some said Officer Hayes had discovered something in the basement that night and was silenced for it. Others swore they had seen candlelight flickering through the church windows long after midnight, long after it had supposedly been locked. The town itself seemed to exhale old secrets. Former parishioners remembered whispers of a breakaway group that had used the basement for private gatherings. No one knew who led them, or why they had stopped suddenly in the fall of 1975. But the most disturbing clue came from the construction workers who had first uncovered the trunk. One of them, a man named Ray Lopez, swore that when the wall crumbled, he had glimpsed something else behind it, a narrow crawl space, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But when police returned to inspect, the opening was gone, sealed by stone as if it had never existed. And then came the incident that pushed fear into the heart of Mill Creek once again. 2 officers assigned to guard the church overnight reported hearing voices, faint, childlike laughter echoing from the basement. They swept the area twice, found nothing, and chalked it up to fatigue. But when they stepped outside at dawn, both discovered deep scratches on their patrol car doors. Scratches that formed a single word. Why? The evidence was growing stranger, and so were the questions. Who had locked away the belongings? Was Officer Hayes writing under duress, or had he become trapped like the children he swore to protect? And why, after decades of silence, did it feel as if the church itself was waking up again? The church basement was sealed off with yellow tape, but that didn't stop the curious from gathering near the gates at night. Some came with candles, others with cameras, hoping to capture proof of the whispers that now haunted Mill Creek. Detective Jensen knew the rumors were outpacing the facts, and unless she found something concrete, the case risked collapsing into legend all over again. On the 3rd night after the discovery, Jensen returned to the church alone. Flashlight in one hand, notebook in the other, she descended the narrow staircase into the basement. Dust hung in the air like fog, the stone walls damp with winter chill. She stood where the trunk had been found, her light sweeping over the cracked floor. That's when she noticed it. Behind the shelf of hymnals stacked against the far wall, the mortar looked different, newer, as though it had been patched decades later. With a grunt, Jensen pushed the shelf aside and ran her fingers over the seam. It was faint, but unmistakable, a doorway brick shut. She called in a team, and by morning the wall was being hammered open. The townspeople gathered outside once again, breathless with anticipation. When the final stone fell, a wave of stagnant air rushed out, air that hadn't moved in nearly 50 years. Behind the wall was a narrow tunnel. Officers squeezed through with flashlights, crawling into the dark. What they found would send shockwaves through Mill Creek. The tunnel led to a chamber, small, circular, carved directly into the earth beneath the church. Inside were 6 wooden chairs arranged in a circle. On each chair lay a single object: a rosary, a pocket knife, a hymn book, a child's shoe, a photograph, and a silver lighter. Each belonged to one of the missing teenagers. But at the center of a circle, on the dirt floor, was something even more chilling: a skeleton in a police uniform, its badge still pinned to the chest. Forensic tags confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The remains belonged to Officer William Hayes. The room fell silent. For nearly half a century, Mill Creek had wondered if Hayes had run away, betrayed the children, or simply disappeared. Now here he was, left to rot in a hidden chamber beneath the very building where the teens were last seen. But the discovery raised even darker questions. The position of the skeleton suggested Hayes had been bound, his wrists still shackled with rusted iron cuffs. Around him, carved into the dirt walls, were dozens of words, scratched in desperation. Not alone. Don't trust them. Choir locked away. Detective Jensen's hand trembled as she ran her light over the final carving, written larger than the rest. The children are still here. The news broke like wildfire. Hayes hadn't abandoned the teenagers. He had been trapped with them, fighting to warn anyone who might come after. And if his final words were true, then the story of Mill Creek was far from over. Families wept, reporters clamored, and late that night, Jensen sat alone with the notebook once more. She noticed something she hadn't before. The last page wasn't stained. It was folded, hidden at the back. She opened it carefully, scrawled in the same frantic hand. Hayes had written one final line. They sang beneath the church, but no one heard them. The next morning, Detective Claire returned to her desk, bleary-eyed but determined. She couldn't stop thinking about the church basement, about the journals, about the crude map. Something about it gnawed at her, like a puzzle piece from the past begging to be connected. She pulled up the digital archives of the Stoneburg Gazette, 1975. The articles flashed across her screen in scanned, yellowed pages. Headlines leapt out. Local teen vanishes after choir practice. Police suspect runaway. Parents plead for answers as search stalls. Community prays for missing girl Elizabeth Hale. Elizabeth Hale. Claire whispered the name under her breath. The photograph beside the article showed a young girl with long brown hair and an innocent, nervous smile. She was wearing the exact same necklace Claire had seen scratched onto the journal cover in the basement. Her pulse quickened. Flipping through more articles, Claire noticed inconsistencies. The police at the time had downplayed the case, repeatedly calling Elizabeth a troubled teen. But letters to the editor painted a different picture. Classmates describing her as kind, studious, with dreams of becoming a teacher. And then, in one obscure follow-up article buried deep within the pages, Claire spotted something chilling. A small notice about a maintenance worker at the church who had been dismissed just days after Elizabeth's disappearance. His name was Charles Denton. Claire wrote the name on her notepad, circling it twice. It was the first real thread. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the grainy picture of Elizabeth Hale, and whispered to herself, this wasn't just a disappearance. Someone wanted her forgotten. Detective Claire couldn't shake off the name Charles Denton, a dismissed maintenance worker, mentioned only once, then erased from the narrative. She marched down to the records division, where the oldest case files were kept in dust-coated boxes. The clerk, a grizzled man in his 60s, raised an eyebrow. Clerk, detective, you sure you want to go digging in the 70s? Half of those files are moth food. Claire, I don't need half. I just need one. Elizabeth Hale, 1975. After some grumbling, he rolled out a cart stacked with fading brown folders. Claire's gloves crinkled against brittle paper as she sifted through decades of forgotten tragedies. And then there it was. Elizabeth Hale, missing person. Case hashtag 1975-042. She opened it carefully. The file was thin, disturbingly thin for a missing teenager. Just a few typed pages, a missing poster, and a single photograph. But something caught her eye. A witness statement from a choir member, dated 2 days after Elizabeth vanished. The girl claimed she had seen Elizabeth arguing with a man in the church parking lot. A janitor, older, wore a cap, smelled like smoke. The name was redacted with thick, black ink. Claire frowned. She held the page up to the light. The redaction wasn't complete, just heavy marker strokes. And faintly, beneath it, she could make out letters. D-E-N-T-O-N. Her heart skipped. The report had been deliberately hidden. Someone back then hadn't just mishandled the case. They had buried it. Claire closed the folder slowly, the weight of corruption pressing down on her chest. If Charles Denton was the last man seen with Elizabeth Hale, why had his name been erased from history? She knew now, this wasn't just a cold case. This was a cover-up, and the church basement journals were about to blow it open. Detective Claire sat at her desk that night, the redacted file spread open before her. The name Charles Denton pulsed in her mind like a wound that refused to close. She typed the name into the department's archives first. Nothing. She tried the DMV, state employment records, even utility bills from the 70s. All dead ends. It was as if someone had scrubbed him from existence. Frustrated, she turned to the old newspapers, scrolling through reels of grainy microfilm until her eyes ached. And then, finally, she found him. A small article dated May 1976. Local janitor fired after allegations of misconduct. Charles Denton, former church employee, dismissed following reports of inappropriate behavior around young parish members. No charges filed. Church officials declined further comment. Claire leaned back, cold realization settling in. Claire muttering they knew. They knew, and they buried it. She scribbled notes furiously. If Elizabeth Hale had confronted Denton, if he had been accused only months after she disappeared, then Denton wasn't just a suspect. He was likely the last thread tying the church to her vanishing. But why wasn't he ever charged? Where did he go after 1976? She dug deeper, tracing Denton through obituaries, property sales, and faded address books. That's when she spotted it. An obituary in a 1992 local paper. Charles Denton, 67, passed away quietly at his home, survived by no immediate family. Claire froze. The address listed was a small house only 3 blocks from the church. For nearly 20 years, he had lived in plain sight. And the chilling part, his death date was July 17, 1992. The exact same night a young boy, Timothy Barnes, had gone missing from the very same neighborhood. Claire's stomach turned. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. She shut off the microfilm machine, her reflection staring back in the dark screen. Denton was dead, but his secrets weren't. And if he had kept records, trophies, or anything hidden, they might still be rotting inside that house. That night in October 1975, the church basement was buzzing with small-town life. Kids laughed as they played tag near the stage. Parents sipped coffee in styrofoam cups. The faint smell of pumpkin pie drifted from the kitchen. But then, without warning, the laughter thinned, then stopped. By the time the parents realized something was wrong, 2 children were missing. Their coats were still hanging neatly on the rack. Their paper plate desserts sat unfinished. The room fell into chaos. A mother's voice cracked through the hall. "Has anyone seen Danny? He was right here a second ago." Another shouted, "Where's Claire? She was helping me with the cookies." The police were called, but the search turned up nothing. The basement that had felt so warm a moment ago now seemed to swallow secrets whole. And for decades, the town lived with the question, how could 2 children vanish from a crowded church basement? Without a trace? In the weeks that followed, the small town split into camps, each with its own explanation. Some believed the children had been abducted by a stranger who somehow slipped into the church unnoticed. But others swore it had to be someone local, because who else would know the church basement so well? Rumors spread like wildfire. A janitor who left town suddenly was whispered about. A neighbor who was seen loitering near the church that night was questioned. Even some church members quietly suspected each other. But nothing stuck. No arrests. No suspects. No closure. As the years passed, the case grew colder. Parents moved away. Witnesses grew older. And slowly, the town buried the story until it became nothing more than a hushed warning told to kids. Stay close. Don't wander. Remember what happened in '75. What no one knew was that the church basement itself still held the answers, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be found. 15 years later, the church was scheduled for a long overdue renovation. The basement, damp and mostly unused, was first on the list. Construction crews moved in with jackhammers and shovels, breaking apart the crumbling concrete floor. Dust and echoes filled the basement, but then one of the workers' tools hit something solid. Not concrete, not rock, something else. They stopped immediately. Clearing the rubble by hand, they unearthed a small rusted box, wedged deep beneath the basement floor. The box was locked, corroded shut by years of moisture. When the foreman pried it open with a crowbar, everyone stepped back. Inside were objects no one expected. A child's hair ribbon, faded pink. A worn leather shoe, far too small for an adult. And a set of yellowed photographs. Images of children at a church picnic, faces smiling, frozen in time. The workers froze. Some swore they felt a chill in that basement, as if the past had suddenly clawed its way into the present. The discovery was enough to bring detectives back to the church. After 15 years, the 1975 case was officially reopened. When the news of the box reached the police department, it spread like wildfire. Detectives who had long retired from the 1975 case were called in to consult. Younger officers, who had only heard whispers of the tragedy, now had evidence sitting in front of them, fragile, haunting evidence. The ribbon was carefully placed into an evidence bag, the shoe into another. The photographs, though faded, were studied under bright lamps. Each face in the picture was cataloged, compared against old yearbooks and family albums from the town. Detective Laura McKinney, who wasn't even born when the children vanished, sat across the evidence table with her mentor, retired Officer Harold Briggs, the man who had once walked the cold, rain-slicked streets in 1975, knocking on doors, searching desperately for answers. This, Briggs whispered, pointing to the ribbon. This belonged to little Mary Collins. Her mother tied her hair with one just like it the day she disappeared. I remember her saying it was Mary's favorite. McKinney leaned in closer, her heart pounding. And the shoe? Can we match it? Briggs nodded slowly. Could be Daniel's. His parents said he lost one the day before. He left the house wearing only one shoe. The photographs, however, were the most chilling of all. Children smiling in the summer sun, gathered for what appeared to be a church picnic on the very grounds where the box had been buried. And there, in the far corner of one photo, stood a shadowed figure, blurred, unrecognizable, but clearly watching. For the first time in years, the detectives had something more than memories and theories. They had tangible links to the missing children. And more importantly, they had a new lead. The case, once thought dead, was alive again. The next morning, the town of Stonebrook awoke to a wave of whispers. News spread fast. The police had found something. For families who had lived decades with unanswered prayers, the sudden call from the precinct was like reopening a wound that had never healed. Mary Collins' mother, now frail and gray, sat in her living room when the phone rang. She gripped the receiver with trembling hands as the detective spoke gently. Mrs. Collins, we've uncovered items that may belong to your daughter. Her voice cracked. Mary, after all these years, do you mean to tell me you found something of hers? She pressed the ribbon against her lips when they brought it to her later that day, sobbing uncontrollably. I tied this in her hair that morning. I told her she looked like an angel. Across town, Daniel's brother, who had been just a teenager when the tragedy struck, was called in. He held the small shoe in his hands, his jaw tightening as tears welled up. He was always running barefoot, always getting into trouble. I never thought this would be all I'd hold of him. The families gathered at the town hall that evening. Some came with hope, others with dread. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by muffled sobs. Detective McKinney stood before them, her voice calm yet weighted with sorrow. We don't have all the answers, but what we found proves one thing. The truth was buried here, right under Stonebrick, and it's time we finally uncover it. For the first time in 30 years, the families looked at each other with a mixture of grief, anger, and fragile hope. The past wasn't gone. It was clawing its way back into the present. In Stonebrick, whispers spread faster than the autumn wind. The discovery of the buried bus wasn't just news. It was an earthquake shaking every family, every street, every corner cafe. People who hadn't spoken about the tragedy in decades now lowered their voices in grocery store aisles, in church pews, and on front porches. Some residents wanted everything unearthed, every bone, every scrap of truth. "We've lived in shadows too long," one father said, pounding his fist on the diner counter. "If those kids suffered, we deserve to know why. We owe them that much." But others feared what might surface. Stonebrick was a small town built on fragile trust, and old wounds ran deep. Digging up the past won't bring them back, the mayor argued during a town hall meeting. We should focus on healing, not tearing ourselves apart. Yet healing was impossible without answers. The families knew it. The younger generation, who had grown up hearing fragments of the story in hushed tones, felt it too. For them, the mystery had always been a ghost, something that clung to the town's name like a shadow no one could escape. At the local bar, old-timers swapped theories with shaky voices. Some swore it had been a kidnapping gone wrong. Others muttered about corruption, about people in power who had known more than they admitted. And then there were whispers of something darker, that Stonebrick itself had secrets buried deeper than anyone dared to say aloud. Detective McKinney watched all this unfold from her quiet corner of the town. She had been in Stonebrick only a few months, but she could feel the tension twisting the town like a rope pulled too tight. She wrote in her notebook that night, "The truth isn't just about the bus. It's about what Stonebrick has been hiding for 30 years." Outside, the church bells rang, echoing across streets that suddenly felt haunted. Stonebrick was no longer just a town. It was a crime scene alive with ghosts. The morning after the bus was uncovered, a rumor spread like wildfire. Not all 25 students had perished that night. At first, people dismissed it as cruel gossip. But then, a retired nurse named Evelyn Carter stepped forward. She claimed that 30 years ago, just after the disappearance, she had treated a boy in the emergency ward of a nearby county hospital. He had been bruised, terrified, and barely able to speak. He kept whispering about a bus, Evelyn told Detective McKinney, her wrinkled hands trembling. About the dark, about being buried alive. "I tried to get more out of him, but men in suits showed up within the hour. They took him away, said it was for his safety. I never saw him again." McKinney's pulse quickened as she scribbled in her notebook. If Evelyn's story was true, then at least one child had survived, and someone had gone to great lengths to erase that fact. The revelation stirred panic and fury among the families. In living rooms lit by dim lamps, parents clutched fading photographs of their children, asking the same agonizing questions. Who was that boy? Why didn't anyone tell us? If one survived, why not more? Some believed Evelyn's story. Others dismissed it as the confused memory of an old woman. But McKinney couldn't shake the detail about men in suits. It reeked of cover-up. That night, as rain pattered against her window, she stared at the photographs of the unearthed bus, her gut twisting. If there had been survivors, they had been silenced or hidden for 30 years. And then came the most chilling part. An anonymous letter slid under her motel room door. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. "They told me never to speak, but I can't keep quiet anymore. I was there. I was on that bus. Meet me at the old quarry, midnight." McKinney held the letter in her hands, her breath caught in her throat. After 3 decades of silence, a survivor was ready to talk. The investigators decided to reach out to Detective Harold Price, one of the original officers who had worked the 1975 disappearance case. Now retired and living in a quiet nursing home, Harold was frail, but his mind was still sharp. When Detective Laura visited him, his eyes widened at the mention of the church basement. "I knew it," Harold whispered, his voice trembling. "Back then, we searched every inch of that town, except that old church. We had no warrant, and the pastor was untouchable. He paused, his hands shaking as he held the edges of his blanket. But I always suspected that place. I could feel something was wrong. Harold's words reignited the team's determination. They realized that what had been overlooked decades ago might now hold the key. For Laura, it was no longer just about solving a case. It was about finishing the work of those who had come before her and bringing peace to families who had waited half a lifetime for answers. Back at the church, the evidence team carefully carried the dusty box into the lab. The cardboard was brittle, nearly falling apart, as if it had been waiting all these years to be opened. Laura stood by, her heart racing. Everyone leaned closer as gloves slid beneath the flaps and pulled them open. Inside were yellowed photographs, handwritten notes, and a small, tattered journal. The photographs were of children, some smiling at picnics, some standing in front of the very church they were now investigating. The notes contained names, dates, and chilling details of gatherings that had never been reported. But it was the journal that froze Laura's breath. On the very first page, in neat, deliberate handwriting, were the words, "They trusted me, and I kept them safe here." A heavy silence filled the room. No one spoke, but everyone knew this was no longer just a case of a missing child. This was evidence of something far darker, something that had been buried beneath the foundation of faith for nearly half a century. Laura sat at her desk late into the night, the small leather-bound journal open in front of her. The handwriting was neat but unsettling, almost obsessive in its uniformity. Each page detailed events from the mid-1970s, meetings, names, coded references that at first glance looked harmless. But as she read deeper, patterns began to emerge. The entries mentioned special gatherings in the church basement, always late at night, and always involving children. Some were listed only by first names, others by initials. The handwriting grew more erratic toward the later pages, filled with phrases like, "The town must never know," and "safe under God's house." Laura circled one name that appeared again and again, Michael H. She cross-checked it against the missing persons files and felt a chill. Michael Hanlon, age 9, disappeared in 1975. Last seen leaving Sunday school. Her hands trembled as she realized what this meant. The journal wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger, a record of the very children who had vanished, hidden in plain sight all these years. Laura walked into the church hall with the journal clutched tightly under her arm. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of age, and the air smelled faintly of dust and candle wax. 3 elders sat waiting for her, men who had served the church for decades, their faces weathered with time but unreadable. She laid the journal on the table between them and slid it forward. "Laura, firmly, you all knew about this, didn't you?" The men exchanged wary glances, but none spoke at first. Finally, Elder Whitaker cleared his throat. "Elder Whitaker, where did you find that?" Laura, leaning in the basement, "Where you buried the truth." The room fell into a heavy silence. Elder Morris shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the closed doors as if afraid someone might overhear. Elder Morris, quietly, we did what we thought was best for the town. The past can't be undone." Laura's voice sharpened, her anger breaking through. "Laura, best for the town? Children disappeared, families destroyed, and you all sat here in this very church, covering it up." Elder Whitaker's face tightened, but instead of denial, he simply said, "Elder Whitaker, some truths are too dangerous. You don't understand the full story." Laura's heart pounded. For the first time, she realized the elders weren't just hiding something. They were protecting someone. Laura's fingers trembled as she flipped the journal back open, her eyes scanning the names scrawled across the brittle pages. She turned the book toward the elders, pointing at a single entry circled in red ink. Laura demanding this name. "Who is it?" The elders froze. Elder Whitaker's jaw tightened. Elder Morris lowered his gaze, and Elder Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The silence dragged on until Laura slammed her palm against the table, the sound echoing through the hollow hall. "Laura, sharply tell me." Elder Whitaker finally leaned forward, his voice low and weary. "Elder Whitaker, that man, he wasn't just anyone. He was one of us, a leader." someone the town trusted. Laura's stomach knotted. Her mind raced back to the whispers, the unease that had spread after the children vanished. She steadied her breath, forcing the question out. Laura who? The elder's eyes met hers, heavy with guilt. Elder Whitaker, Pastor Halloway. The name hit Laura like a stone to the chest. Pastor Halloway, the same man whose portrait still hung in the church foyer, honored as a guiding light of faith and community. Her voice cracked as she whispered, Laura, you've been protecting him all these years. Elder Morris finally looked up, his face pale. Elder Morris, if the truth had come out then, the entire town would have fallen apart. We thought burying it would spare everyone. But Laura could only stare at them, her grip tightening on the journal, because now she knew the man the town revered as a saint was at the center of its darkest secret. Laura's footsteps echoed against the wooden floorboards as she stormed out of the meeting hall, the journal clutched tightly to her chest. The elders shuffled behind her, their silence a heavy weight pressing down on every step. As she entered the church foyer, her eyes were immediately drawn upward, to the gilded frame hanging proudly above the entrance. Pastor Halloway's portrait stared down at her. His painted expression was one of calm benevolence, hands folded in prayer, eyes lifted heavenward. Laura's throat tightened. Laura, bitterly, under her breath, a saint, that's what you wanted everyone to believe. She moved closer, her gaze drilling into the canvas. The painted details mocked her, the faint smile, the soft light around his face, the reverence etched into every brushstroke. Behind her, Elder Carter's voice trembled. Elder Carter, he built this town. He baptized our children. He married our families. Without him, Stonebrook would have never survived. Laura spun around, fury flashing in her eyes. Laura snapping. And at what cost? 25 children buried in silence? You let him live as a hero while their parents died with questions. The hall fell into a suffocating stillness. Only the creak of the old building filled the air. Laura turned back to the portrait, her breathing ragged. Her fingers brushed the bottom of the frame, as though she could feel the weight of history pressing against her skin. Laura softly, to herself, if this is the face of Stonebrook's salvation, then this town was built on lies. And in that moment, she made a silent vow. The world was going to know what happened here. That night, Laura sat alone at her desk, the journal open before her. A single lamp cast a pale circle of light across the pages, the rest of the room swallowed by shadows. Her fingers traced the uneven handwriting, each word pulling her deeper into a life she wished wasn't true. The entries spoke of duality. By day, Pastor Halloway was the town's savior, leading prayers, feeding the poor, building homes after the flood. But by night, he descended into something else entirely, a man consumed by visions, claiming he was chosen to lead a new covenant. Laura flipped a page and found sketches, disturbing symbols drawn in ink, circles interlocked with crosses, strange numbers scrawled in the margins, and the word purification, repeated over and over. Her stomach turned. Laura, whispering, "This isn't faith, this is obsession." She reached for her recorder, her voice unsteady as she documented. Laura, into recorder, journal dated June 17th, 1985. Mentions a trial by fire, possibly a reference to the disappearance of the children. Evidence suggests he believed he was saving them from corruption. A knock rattled her door. She jumped, snapping the journal shut. Voice muffled from outside. "Laura, it's Deputy Harris. You awake?" She hesitated, then pulled the door open. The young deputy looked uneasy, his eyes darting down the hallway as though he feared being watched. "Deputy Harris," low voice, "I've been digging through old records. There's something you need to see. Pastor Halloway, he wasn't who he said he was." Laura's heart skipped. "Laura, what do you mean?" Harris leaned closer, lowering his voice. Deputy Harris, before Stonebrook, he had another name, another town, and another group of children that disappeared. Laura felt her knees weaken. The journal in her hand suddenly felt heavier than lead. The nightmare hadn't begun in Stonebrook. It had only found its way there. The news spread fast across town. Evidence had been found that might finally reveal what happened in 1975. Reporters swarmed the small neighborhood, but at the center of it all was the family of the missing boy, Daniel. His younger sister, now in her 60s, stood before microphones with trembling hands. "I was just a girl when my brother vanished," she said, her voice cracking. "For 50 years, we lived in silence, in pain, wondering where he was. And now we may finally know." Behind her, photos of Daniel as a child, smiling in his Sunday best, were pinned to a church notice board. The community wept with her. This wasn't just about bones in a basement. It was about stolen childhoods, unanswered prayers, and decades of grief finally being given a voice. The camera lingered on the sister's tear-streaked face as she whispered, almost to herself, "Daniel, we never stopped looking." At the crime lab, the forensic team began their meticulous work. DNA testing was ordered, soil samples were analyzed, and the shoe was compared to photos the family had saved from the 1970s. Detective Alvarez flipped through the old case files, his brow furrowed. There were names that kept surfacing, men who had lived in the neighborhood at the time, men who were questioned but never charged. One name, in particular, appeared over and over. Harold Klein. Alvarez muttered under his breath. The handyman who lived 2 houses down. The files showed that Harold had been interviewed after Daniel's disappearance. He had alibis, shaky ones, but they were never fully disproved. The most chilling note, Harold moved out of town just weeks after Daniel vanished, only to return decades later quietly and die in that very same house. For the first time, the cold case was starting to heat up. When Harold Klein's name leaked into the community, a chill swept across Stonebrook. At the local diner, whispers filled the air. Elderly residents who had lived through the tragedy exchanged uneasy glances. "I always thought there was something off about him," muttered one old man, stirring his coffee. Harold was too friendly with the kids, always hanging around. A woman at the counter shook her head. "I remember he used to offer kids candy from that tool shed of his. Gave me the creeps back then, but nobody said anything." Rumors spread quickly. Some remembered how Harold avoided eye contact with Daniel's mother after the boy went missing. Others recalled strange noises in the middle of the night coming from his house. Detectives Alvarez and Monroe began knocking on doors. Many of the town's older residents, now in their 70s and 80s, opened up with stories they had kept buried for years. One woman clutched a rosary as she whispered, "I saw Harold digging in his backyard the week Daniel disappeared. But when the police asked me back then, I didn't have the courage to speak up." Every memory painted a darker portrait of Harold Klein, not just a lonely handyman, but a man who had lived for decades under the weight of suspicion that no one had ever dared to voice aloud. For Daniel's mother, the revelation was unbearable. She sat silently in her living room, staring at Harold's name in the paper, her hands trembling. The town was no longer just mourning a boy. It was beginning to realize that a predator might have been living among them all along. Detective Alvarez sat hunched over the archives, the dim glow of the library lamp casting long shadows across stacks of dusty files. She flipped through brittle newspaper clippings, old employment records, and faded town registries. Harold Klein had always lived on the edges of Stonebrook, never quite part of the community, but never far enough away to be forgotten. His work history was scattered. Handyman jobs, seasonal farm labor, occasional construction work. Nothing stable, nothing permanent. But patterns emerged. Wherever Harold worked, there were rumors. A missing pet here, a frightened child there. Nothing substantial enough to build a case on back then. But now, with Daniel's disappearance under the microscope, every whisper sounded like a warning sign. Detective Monroe dug into state databases. "No convictions," he muttered, scanning the screen, but plenty of complaints filed. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, loitering near schools. All dismissed for lack of evidence. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. This guy was slippery, always one step away from getting caught. Then Alvarez found it. A police report from 1979. A 12-year-old boy from a neighboring town had claimed that Harold followed him home from school. The boy described Harold's van, right down to the rusted bumper and cracked windshield. But again, no charges had been filed. Alvarez slammed the folder shut. He was escalating. First pets, then kids, and then Daniel. They exchanged a grim look. The detectives knew they weren't just dealing with the possibility of a predator. They were dealing with a man who had managed to slip through the cracks of justice for decades. And now, after all these years, Harold Klein's secrets were finally clawing their way back into the light. By the following morning, Stonebrook was buzzing. Word of Harold Klein's past spread like wildfire. People crowded into the diner, the hardware store, even the church steps, whispering in tight circles. The name Harold was no longer just a shadow on the edge of town. It was a curse that hung heavy in the air. At the grocery store, Mrs. Larkin slammed a can of beans onto the counter. I knew something was off about him. Always staring too long at the kids in the parking lot. Another man, his voice sharp with anger, chimed in, and the police let him walk free for years. His fist struck the counter, rattling the display stand. If they'd done their jobs back then, maybe Daniel would still be here. At the cafe, teenagers sat wide-eyed, listening to stories from their parents about Harold. Some tales were exaggerated, others eerily consistent. A dog disappearing, a child saying they felt watched walking home, windows creaking open at night. By dusk, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Flashlights bobbed in the dark as voices grew louder, angrier. "We deserve answers," one woman shouted. "Where's Harold now?" a man demanded, his voice carrying over the restless group. Another voice, sharp, bitter, rose above the noise. "If the law won't handle him, we will." Inside, Detective Alvarez watched from the window. Her stomach knotted. The mob outside wasn't just angry, they were desperate. She turned to Monroe. "If we don't move carefully, this town is going to take justice into its own hands." Monroe rubbed the back of his neck, eyes fixed on the shifting crowd. "And if Harold's still out there watching this unfold," he exhaled, heavy with dread, "we're exactly where he wants us, scared, divided, and ready to tear ourselves apart." The night deepened. The people of Stonebrook weren't just waiting for answers anymore. They were demanding justice. And somewhere in the quiet edges of town, Harold Klein might have been listening. The discovery of that torn photograph in the old church basement had already shaken the town, but the deeper detectives dug, the more unsettling the picture became. The image showed three young boys in 1970s clothing, standing near the very steps that led down to the basement. Two of them had names scrawled on the back, Michael and Daniel, but the third boy's name was scratched out violently, as though someone wanted his identity erased forever. Detective Harris spread the photo on the table in the evidence room, his hands trembling. "Why scratch out just one name?" he muttered. What was someone trying to hide? Old newspaper archives soon gave them a chilling clue. In 1975, three boys had vanished after attending a Sunday service. The town only ever acknowledged two of them publicly, because their families came forward. But whispers suggested there had been a third child, a boy who didn't belong to anyone in town, a boy whose disappearance had been buried under silence. The realization sent a chill through everyone. The basement wasn't just a hiding place. It was a graveyard of secrets, built brick by brick by a community that had chosen to forget. The silence in the evidence room grew heavier as Detective Harris slid the photo toward Sheriff Cole. The sheriff stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "This isn't just a missing persons case anymore," Cole said quietly. "This is a cover-up." The room buzzed with unease. Officer Ramirez leaned forward, whispering, "But why erase a child from history who benefits from pretending he never existed?" The answer came from an unlikely source. An elderly woman, Mrs. Langley, who had lived in Stonebrook all her life, asked to speak with the detectives after hearing about the photo. Her voice shook as she recalled her memories. "There was a boy, a foster child," she said, clutching her shawl. "He came with one of the families who attended church, but he wasn't wanted. People said he didn't belong here. And then, one day he was gone. No one asked. No one cared." Her eyes filled with tears. "We were told not to speak of him. The pastor said silence was best for the community's peace, and we obeyed." Detective Harris felt a knot form in his stomach. A child had been erased, not by accident, but by choice. The scratched-out name wasn't just a detail. It was evidence of a deliberate attempt to bury the truth. And now, nearly 5 decades later, that truth was clawing its way back into the light. That night, Detective Harris couldn't sleep. The image of the scratched-out boy haunted him. The ghost of a child who had been abandoned not once, but twice. First by the people who should have protected him, and then by history itself. He sat at his desk, the dim lamp casting long shadows across the cluttered papers. He flipped the photo over for the 100th time, tracing the faint outline where the name had once been written. The pressure of someone's pen strokes was still there, indented on the back. An idea struck him. He grabbed a soft pencil, lightly shading over the indentations. Slowly, like a spirit rising from the grave, letters began to appear. T-H-O-M-S. The boy's name was Thomas. Harris froze, whispering it aloud. Thomas. For the first time, the erased child had an identity again. But the moment felt heavier than triumph. Whoever had gone to such lengths to erase Thomas's existence wouldn't have done so lightly. This wasn't negligence, it was intention. And Harris knew something with chilling certainty. If Thomas had been buried in silence all these years, then someone powerful had made sure of it. And that someone might still be alive. The next morning, Harris walked into the Stonebrook Public Records office, a dusty old building tucked between 2 shuttered storefronts. The clerk on duty, an older woman with half-moon glasses, looked up from her paperwork as Harris entered. "I need access to foster placement records from 1990, Harris said, flashing his badge. The woman frowned. "Those are sealed, Detective, especially if it involves minors." Harris leaned forward, lowering his voice. "A boy named Thomas. No last name yet. Someone tried to erase him. I'm not asking for gossip. I'm asking because this child might hold the key to why 25 others vanished that year." The woman's eyes softened. She hesitated, then sighed. "Give me a minute." She shuffled through the back shelves, returning with a thick, leather-bound ledger. The spine was cracked, and the pages smelled of mold. She flipped through carefully, muttering under her breath. Then she stopped, finger pressed against a line. "Here, Thomas Caldwell. Entered the system June 1989. Age 10. Foster placement, Whitmore residence." Harris's pulse quickened. "Whitmore as in Judge Harold Whitmore?" The woman gave him a sharp look. "You didn't hear it from me." Harris leaned back, chills racing down his spine. Judge Whitmore wasn't just a small-town judge. He had been the most powerful man in Stonebrook in the early 90s. If Thomas had been placed in the Whitmore household, then the erased boy was tied directly to the very people who had overseen the town's laws and secrets. And if Judge Whitmore had something to hide, maybe he had the influence to bury 25 children's truth along with it. Harris sat in his car outside the courthouse, staring at the name Whitmore scribbled in his notebook. The realization gnawed at him. If Thomas Caldwell had been placed in Judge Harold Whitmore's home, then this wasn't just a missing child case. This was a cover-up rooted in power. He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Diane, it's Harris. I need you to run a background check on Judge Whitmore's family. Past residences, property records, sealed cases, everything. Don't leave anything out." There was silence on the other end before Diane whispered, "Harris, are you sure you want to go down that road? The Whitmores aren't just powerful. They've been untouchable for decades. If Thomas was with them, it means the case wasn't just buried. It was protected." "That's exactly why I need the truth," Harris said, his voice steady but heavy. "Send me what you can buy tonight." After hanging up, Harris leaned back in his seat. His mind kept circling one thought. What did Thomas see in that house? That evening, Diane emailed a folder. Harris opened it, and his breath caught. Among the properties listed under the Whitmore name was a forgotten summer estate just outside town, an old farmhouse on the edge of Hollow Creek Woods, less than 3 miles from where the buried bus had been found. Pinned to the report was a single note Diane had scrawled in red. Neighbors reported strange gatherings at the estate in 1990. No official records. Everything suppressed. "Harris, be careful." Harris closed the file, heart pounding. He finally had a direction. Thomas wasn't just a forgotten foster child. He was a boy who had lived inside the Whitmore home, and might have been the only one left alive who knew what happened the night 25 students disappeared. The drive to Hollow Creek Woods was long, the road winding and empty, swallowed by thick trees on both sides. Harris gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer he got, the forest pressing in as though it wanted to keep its secrets buried forever. The estate appeared suddenly, looming through the fog. The Whitmore farmhouse was massive, though years of neglect had worn it down. Shattered windows gaped like hollow eyes, the roof sagged, and vines crawled up its stone walls. The iron gate hung crooked, creaking softly with the wind. Harris parked a short distance away and approached on foot, flashlight in one hand, recorder in the other. As he stepped through the gate, the air felt heavier, colder. His boots crunched against the gravel path, every sound amplified in the silence. Inside, the house smelled of rot and mildew. The floorboards groaned under his weight. Faded portraits lined the hallway, faces of stern men and women who all bore the Whitmore name. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him. He entered what must have been the parlor, its grand fireplace now blackened and crumbling. A long table stood in the center, covered in dust. Yet on its surface, faint scratches formed strange, deliberate patterns. Harris leaned closer, brushing the dust aside. Carved into the wood were initials, dozens of them. Some were barely visible, others deep and jagged, as though carved by desperate hands. Harris whispered into his recorder. Children were here. They left marks, initials, maybe names. This wasn't just a farmhouse. It was a holding place. As he traced his fingers across the carved letters, one set of initials froze him in place. T.C. Thomas Caldwell. The hair on Harris's neck stood up. His hunch was right. Thomas had been here. And if Thomas had carved his initials into that table, then he hadn't been alone. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed from upstairs. Harris spun toward the staircase, flashlight beam trembling against the railing. The house wasn't empty. Harris's breath quickened as he raised the flashlight toward the staircase. The beam caught layers of peeling wallpaper, a banister coated in dust, and steps warped from age. Yet one fact unsettled him the most. Those creaks had been too deliberate, too heavy for a house simply settling. Slowly he ascended, each step groaned beneath his boots, the silence of the house amplifying every sound. His hand hovered near his sidearm, though he hadn't yet drawn it. His instinct whispered that what waited above wasn't just memory, it was something else. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with doors. Some stood ajar, others shut tight. His flashlight swept across them, landing on one room at the far end where the door was slightly open, swinging gently as though someone had just slipped inside. Heart pounding, Harris approached. The closer he got, the more the air shifted, colder, sharper, carrying the faint scent of burning wood, though no fire burned anywhere. He nudged the door with his boot, the hinges shrieking. Inside was a bedroom, stripped nearly bare. The wallpaper had yellowed, the bed frame rusted, and the ceiling sagged. But his light froze on the closet door, where deep gouges marred the wood, scratches etched by fingernails, not tools. He crouched closer, running his fingers across them. Tiny fragments of nails still clung inside the grooves. His chest tightened as he imagined children locked inside, clawing desperately to get out. He whispered into the recorder, voice trembling. Evidence of entrapment. Multiple scratches consistent with human fingernails. Many someones, were kept here. Just then, a soft thud came from inside the closet. Harris stumbled back, hand darting to his gun. He steadied his breath, then pulled the closet door open with one swift motion. The flashlight revealed nothing at first, only darkness and the stale smell of rot. Then, slowly, something came into focus on the floorboards. A small, dirt-caked shoebox, tied shut with brittle twine. The box looked decades old, and it was waiting for him. The following week, Sarah and Detective Miller arranged a community gathering inside St. Matthew's Church, the same church that had once hidden the basement chamber. This time, though, the doors were thrown open, not to conceal, but to confront the truth. Families of the missing children sat in the pews, faces lined with decades of grief. Some clutched faded photographs, others just sat silently, hands clasped tight. Miller stood at the front, his voice steady but heavy. For 50 years, this town carried wound. Tonight, we face it together. He explained the findings, the hidden room, the records of the children taken. Each word was a blow, but also a release. People wept openly, pain mixing with the strange relief of finally knowing. When Sarah stepped up, she spoke not as a journalist, but as someone who had been carrying a burden too. The truth was buried beneath these floors. But lies don't stay hidden forever. What matters is that we remember the children, not just how they were taken, but who they were. Her voice trembled, but her words drew strength from the silence that followed. A choir softly sang a hymn. Candles flickered, lighting the dark wood of the old church. And in that moment, for the first time in half a century, the town didn't feel trapped by the shadows of its past. Instead, it felt as though the walls of St. Matthew's were finally breathing again, echoing not with secrets, but with remembrance. The case was not fully closed, but the silence had been broken. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond Stonebrook. News outlets across Oregon, and eventually the entire country, covered the discovery of the hidden chamber beneath St. Matthew's. Reporters swarmed the small town, cameras flashing against weathered bricks and cracked sidewalks. For many residents, it was overwhelming, but for the families, it was validation. The world finally knew what they had carried in silence for so long. Sarah worked tirelessly, crafting an article that didn't sensationalize but humanized. She wrote about the children by name, about their favorite games, their dreams, the families who never stopped waiting. She ended with a haunting line. They were not just victims of the church's shadows. They were sons and daughters whose laughter was stolen, but whose memory endures. Detective Miller, meanwhile, coordinated with federal investigators to reopen old leads. A few elderly figures who had once held positions of influence in Stonebrook were quietly taken in for questioning. Some denied everything, but their trembling hands betrayed them. The web of silence was unraveling. One morning, Sarah received an envelope at her motel. No return address, just her name written in a shaky hand. Inside was a single photograph. Children lined up in the church basement, their eyes hollow, their faces pale. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, were the words, "They trusted us." The image made her stomach twist. It wasn't just a clue, it was a confession. Someone who had been there, someone still alive, wanted the truth to be known. For Sarah, it meant the story was far from over. For Miller, it meant there were still doors left to open, still names that had not yet been spoken. And for Stonebrook, it meant that the ghosts of 1974 were not finished speaking. The photograph burned in Sarah's mind as she met with Detective Miller in the dimly lit motel room. "We need to figure out who sent this," Miller said, spreading it out on the table. The children in the photo were lined up in a way that suggested order, almost ceremonial. One of them, Thomas Caldwell, stood slightly apart, head bowed. "Look at the background," Sarah whispered. "See the markings on the wall? Those aren't just scratches. They match the carvings we found at the Whitmore estate." Miller's eyes narrowed. So Thomas was there. He survived. Suddenly, a knock came at the door. Both turned sharply. Miller signaled Sarah to stay back and opened it slowly. A man, frail but determined, stepped inside. His hair was gray, his clothes dusty from travel. "I'm the one who sent the photograph," he said, voice quivering. "I was a caretaker at the Whitmore estate back then. I couldn't do anything at the time, but Thomas, he survived because I helped him escape." Sarah and Miller stared, stunned. The decades of silence, the missing children, the erased names, it was all connected. He led a quiet life after, the man continued. "The town thinks he vanished, but he only disappeared to survive. He's still alive." The room went silent. For the first time in 50 years, hope pierced the dark history of Stonebrook. Thomas Caldwell, the boy erased from history, was not just a memory anymore. He was the key to exposing the truth once and for all. Following the caretaker's directions, Sarah and Detective Miller drove deep into the woods, on the outskirts of Hollow Creek. The sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows that twisted like fingers across the dirt road. Every step toward the small cabin hidden among the pines felt like stepping further into history itself. The cabin was unassuming, a single-story structure with faded wooden siding and a thin wisp of smoke curling from the chimney. Miller knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet forest. After a tense moment, the door opened. A man in his 50s stood there, cautious but alert. His hair was streaked with gray, his eyes wary. He looked exactly as the caretaker had described. Thomas Caldwell, older but unmistakable. I wasn't expecting anyone," Thomas said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and fear. Sarah stepped forward gently. "Thomas, we want to help. We need your story, your truth, so the world can finally know what happened." Thomas's shoulders slumped. For decades, he had carried the burden of secrets, fear, and survival alone. Yet now, as he looked at the two faces before him, something in him shifted. A weight he had long carried was finally being acknowledged. Detective Miller nodded encouragingly. "You're safe here. No judgment, just the truth." Thomas swallowed hard, tears brimming. They were all children, and I couldn't save them, but I survived somehow. Sarah held her recorder tightly, her pen poised. Every word he spoke would become a lifeline connecting past to present, finally unraveling the dark web that had haunted Stonebrick for half a century. The final chapter of the mystery, the one that had begun in the shadows of a church basement, was about to be written. Thomas led Sarah and Miller into the cabin, where a small wooden table was cleared of years of dust. He sank into a chair, hands clasped tightly, and took a deep breath. "It started in 1974, he began, his voice low, shaking. "The Whitmores, they were never ordinary people. They believed in control over everything in Stonebrick. The children, they were part of some twisted plan, something they called preserving purity." He paused, swallowing hard. "I was placed there as a foster child. At first, I didn't understand. I saw the other children, and I felt fear. Then I realized what they were doing. Isolating kids, keeping them trapped, erasing their identities. The ones who questioned them disappeared." Sarah leaned forward, heart racing. "And Daniel? Michael? The others? They didn't survive," Thomas whispered, his eyes haunted. "I was lucky, or maybe stubborn enough, to escape. I hid, moved, changed my name. I've lived my life in silence, carrying their stories with me. But the photographs, the basement, they reminded me of everything I swore I'd never speak of." Detective Miller placed a comforting hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You're safe now. We're going to make sure their voices are heard, that no one can erase them again." Thomas nodded, tears streaming. "It's time. It's time the town remembered them properly, not just as names, but as children who deserve to be seen." The cabin was quiet, filled only with the weight of decades of hidden truth finally finding its voice. Stonebrick's dark past was unraveling, and at last, the light of reckoning had reached the shadows. The reunion was arranged in the old church courtyard. Families, reporters, and town officials gathered under a gray autumn sky, the air heavy with anticipation. Candles flickered in the breeze, casting long shadows on the worn brick walls. Thomas stepped forward, guided by Sarah and Detective Miller. Faces in the crowd turned as recognition dawned. Some wept openly. Others could only whisper names, afraid that the sound of their voices might break them completely. Daniel's sister, now in her 60s, approached Thomas first. She reached out a trembling hand, and he took it gently. Tears streamed down both their faces as decades of grief and longing flowed into a single embrace. "We never gave up," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Even when hope felt impossible, we never gave up." Thomas nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I carry them all with me every day. Their voices, their laughter. I've waited for this moment, so they can finally be remembered." One by one, the families shared quiet words, a mix of grief, relief, and closure. The town, once haunted by secrets, now stood witness to the truth. The children who had vanished decades ago were no longer erased. They were seen, honored, and remembered. Detective Miller and Sarah exchanged a glance, the weight of years pressing down, yet tempered by the knowledge that justice, though delayed, had finally begun. The shadows of the past had lifted, leaving behind the fragile, luminous threads of memory, truth, and healing. In the weeks following the public revelation, Stonebrick began to heal. The church basement was sealed permanently, but a memorial was placed in its courtyard. A simple stone monument engraved with the names of every child who had vanished, including Thomas's friends. Candles and flowers were left daily by townspeople, a quiet vigil of remembrance and respect. Local authorities reopened investigations into the Whitmore estate, uncovering decades of suppressed evidence. While some of the adults involved were long gone, records and testimonies brought accountability where possible. Thomas, now finally free from hiding, worked with Sarah to document the story fully. Interviews, photographs, and letters were collected, forming a permanent archive that would preserve the memory of the children and the town's painful history. Stonebrick itself changed. The once silent streets now buzzed with conversation, remembrance, and cautious hope. The community, once complicit in its own silence, began teaching children the importance of vigilance, compassion, and speaking out. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped behind the trees and the wind rustled through the churchyard, one could almost hear the laughter of children long gone, a reminder that even in tragedy, memory and truth endure. The shadows had lifted, and the town, scarred but wiser, finally looked toward a future shaped not by secrets, but by remembrance.